works. Does it work? Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and friends, I am sure that you will benefit from oxygenating brainstorming after lunch, which is the best way to have a siesta. We are getting close to the end of two very, very crowded days from an intellectual point of view. This session, the 6th edition of our forum, has been an opportunity for those of us who have attended to make a reality check of where we stand after 6 months since the invasion of Russia on the 24th of February. It is my privilege to moderate a panel which is covering from another angle the experiences gathered during this dramatic time frame, which is just a small drop in what has been accumulating in Europe during the last 30 years or so. Namely, the panel is entitled in a challenging way, Ukrainian Miracle, How Did They Hold the Line and Stop the Invasion? And I will start from the very beginning by saying that this title is not related to divine intervention. The miracle is simply the human factor. The human factor and the resilience of man in front of existential challenges. Our guests today in this panel, and I will start in the order of their interventions. Mykhailo SAMUS, Director of New Geopolitics Research Network. Actually, Mykhailo is leading one of the first institutes with which New Strategy Center has concluded a partnership agreement, and our contacts go back prior to 2022, much deeper into time. And I think this is another factor of the resilience. The resilience did not start on 24th of February. It started much earlier. I won't deal too much on our friendship and working relationship. Ms. Oleksandra TSEKHANOVSKA, head of the Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group, Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Practically one of the leitmotifs of this forum, focusing on Ukraine as a catalyst for developments on regional, European and global affairs, has been disinformation and fake news. I also noticed that you have been studying in Beijing. I started my diplomatic career in Beijing. It's very interesting. A lot has been said about China within this forum. So this is another angle, including from your professional expertise. Mr. Iulian CHIFU, Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, but on and off during our career, we have been knowing each other for some decades. Also a think tankist, an expert on foreign policy, and I would say his feet, his mind, his hands, everything is deeply anchored into the Black Sea and the eastern borders of Romania, including the Republic of Moldova, Ukraine, and the other side of the Black Sea. Mr. Adam EBERHARDT, Director of the Center for Eastern Studies, the Eastern Institute in Poland. I don't have enough words for the partnership with our two institutes and for the working and friendship relations we have developed in time, and for the quality of our intellectual dialogue. You can see from this panel that you have the epicenter of the conflict taking, the war taking now place. And I will make a point that from the other angle, looking at things this morning, in the other panels moderated by Antonia Coghibashanu, from the general or the global to the particular, we start now from the particular. Then we have, alongside Ukraine, the countries sharing the longest border with Ukraine and more than the longest border, Romania and Poland, sharing destiny together and solidarity. And I will now give you the floor to deal on these issues, resilience in its, let's say, material incarnation in the military dimension. What led to the preparation to withstand the 24 February shock? And how did the Ukrainian society react? And what is the impact and the response in countries like Romania and Poland, as I said, sharing the same destiny? Mykhailo, you have the floor.
Ambassador, thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely right that New Strategy Center and New Geopolitics Research Network are long-time friends, and I'd like to thank New Strategy Center, personally you, Ambassador, personally to George Skutaro for invitation and opportunity to be here. Again, to be here, I'd like to thanks to Ukrainian soldiers, men and women who is fighting now just these seconds, giving us opportunity together to be here in the great democratic country, to exchange our thoughts, to be in a comfortable place, and they are giving to us their lives, and I think it's we should be thankful for them for our life, of course, as well. So, talking about the national resilience. To be honest, after the 2014, when we started to analyze what's happening, and actually then Russia started this aggression, occupied Crimea and Donbass, and we analyzed what kind of defense should we build in this situation. In Ukraine, we had a lot of discussions, and finally we defined this system could be effective in hybrid warfare, because remember that period of these 8 years when we talking about mainly not about the conventional kinetic warfare, but about hybrid warfare. And we understood that the best method, best instrument how to fight with hybrid warfare, it's a national resilience concept. What does it mean, national resilience? And it's great to start with this definition to understand what's happened 24th of February, why Ukrainian nation found capabilities to stop this absolutely unbelievable aggression. Because a couple hours ago, it was a discussion here with Andrei Larionov, and he told that simple mathematics, if we have a simple mathematics, it's impossible to fight with Russia at all. And actually together, Ukraine, Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, if we get together, it's impossible, simple mathematics fight with Russians. We don't have any chances, because they have 1,000 of tanks, they have 1,000 artillery system, they have 1,000 of missiles, and we have hundreds together. Remember, Germany, even Germany have only 200 tanks now. So compared to Russians, 10, maybe more tanks and armored vehicles, it's absolutely impossible. So a key element here, asymmetric approach. Asymmetric approach, but not symmetric. And our definition of national resilience, it's actually the abilities of nation to adapt and recover and continue to develop under negative influence without compromising international interests. We made this definition kind of in 2016, I think, together with our friends from Estonia and Poland. And we work on this definition a long time. And after this, we check it in our projects in Donbass that time. And we found that national resilience, it's actually, if you're talking about the definition of nation, what does it mean nation? It's not a state. In democratic system, nation, it's cooperation between state as a service for civil society and every citizen, and all of these three components, citizens, the civil society, and state, should work together in synergy, and in this case, only in this case, we could talk about the national resilience. So what we had the 24th of February, of course it was shock, but it was really magic that all of these three components of our nation started to work in synergy, starting with soldiers, the civil society, president, government, and everybody. They had the single decision to fight. And it was a critical, I would say, moment when even United States and UK proposed to Zelensky to move to London just to have a government there, because they thought that it should be kind of 2-3 days before Russians occupied Kiev. And it was absolutely real, because in first hours of 24th of February, we understood that, of course, special operation forces already seated inside of the city, and of course in suburbs. The missiles started to hit different airports and airfields and air defense positions around Kiev and around main cities. So if, for example, President told that I would move to another country, I'm sure it will be a very strong impact on the Ukrainian national resilience. But in that moment, it was a decisive moment, everybody decided to fight. And of course, it was a catastrophic situation for Putin personally, for Russian armed forces. And remembering what's happened next month, Russian forces, they just defeated and escaped with great losses. At first time in, I think, in the history for Russia after the Second World War, they losses on 1,000 of soldiers. They just escaped to Belarus again, and it was a finish of blitzkrieg. After this, they changed to war attrition, what we're talking about now. And just to be short, I just give you several points, what I think important to understand from military point of view, and give some maybe forecasts for next development, and maybe to give food for our discussion here today. So firstly, obviously this conflict is, I think that the most intensive military conflict in Europe since Second World War. I think it's absolutely clear. And if we're talking about the time, I think it's impossible even to analyze how long it will continue and how long needs to defeat Putin. Because from my opinion, the only exit from this war, it's military defeat of Putin regime. It's only solution for this situation, only solution for this conflict. Of course, a lot of people are repeating this, but I think it's very difficult. And if we're talking about such a component like a time, it's not the most important now for us. The most important for us is our capabilities and our readiness to fight. This is so, because a lot of now it's often a question: when will be the full-scale counteroffensive operation on the southern direction? Very easy. When, it's not the most important thing here. The time is not critical here. The critical components here, it's a readiness of Ukrainian group of force on the southern direction to conduct this operation and to get success in this. And of course, because Russians moved additionally kind of 10,000 troops to right side of the Dnieper for Ukrainian forces, we need to prepare more and more. And of course, it's a great that we have additional capabilities like HIMARS to have a deep fire impact on the logistics, on the command post, on the air defense, especially air defense, because intensity of Russian air defense, it's a great problem for not only for traditional aviation, but for our drones like Bayraktars. Maybe you remember the first days of the full-scale operation, they used a lot of Bayraktars, but after this, we had a pause, and this pause because of Russian air defense. They use it in electronic warfare. So now, last several days, we've got a lot of movie from Bayraktars. It means that Russian air defense was suppressed by Ukrainian HARM missiles, anti-radar missiles, and I think it was pretty successful. What absolutely important, together with national resilience concept and what does it mean in concrete steps for Ukraine, we designed a territorial defense approach based on Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Finnish experience. And I think it was one of the decisive points on 24th of February, because just since 1st of January, we started to use a new model of territorial defense, 1st of January of 22. And it was absolutely unbelievable when in the morning on 24th of February, Ukrainian citizens just get Kalashnikov from the trucks and started to form the units and go to kill special operation forces groups, Russians who get into the Kiev and Kharkiv. For example, Kiev and Kharkiv cases should be studied very, very intently, because I'm sure that in Kharkiv, especially, because traditionally Russians thought that Kharkiv is a pro-Russian city, because it's traditionally a lot of Russian-speaking population. It's 20 kilometers from the Russian border, so it's a more than 1 million population city. And in this city, it was a very strong territorial defense, and Russians couldn't make any success there at all. But territorial defense issue is very important if you'd like to build national resilience strong and effective. And another point here, the network-centric warfare. So if we're talking about if we compare Ukrainian and Russian forces, at least of course the size is obviously Russia has dozens of thousands tanks, artillery systems. Ukraine has hundreds. So in size, Russian forces absolutely incompatible. But if Ukraine use asymmetric approach and joint, even Soviet weapons, because we still have basically Soviet weapons, together with command and control, sophisticated command and control, together with sophisticated intelligence system in one network, and use these together with drones and new approaches in reconnaissance intelligence, we've got this system of very effective network-centric warfare, and together with territorial defense and other components of national resilience, it plays very effective and very comprehensive approach to stop Russian aggression and even have success. Even, again, Andrei Larionov told that obviously we don't have any chances because Russia has too many forces, the thousands, the 18 million of mobilization reserve, etc. But I am sure that this 18 million, can you imagine that Putin afraid to make even a partial mobilization, because he afraid that these people, which were not ready for long war attrition, because it was a blitzkrieg actually in first time. The idea of Putin was to organize conflict such a way that Russian people didn't mention that it's just a conflict, just denazification of Ukraine. It's a great mission of empire to stop Ukrainians to do some wrong things. It was kind of punishment for Ukrainians, and it was kind of punishment, of course, by only one movement of finger of Putin. And Russian propaganda at that time, they told that, like 20th of February, they told, we just only high our finger and Ukrainians just escaped. It was kind of famous propagandist model. But if we're talking about the war of attrition, I'm sure that it should be something different model from Putin proposed to elites, Russian elites, and proposed to Russian people, because the punishment of Ukrainians for 3 years campaign, I'm not sure that it's a great idea for this war. So they need to change the concept of this war, and I'm not sure that they have a solution for this. Talking about the forecast. Of course, I would say just two aspects. How will act Russia and how will act Ukraine. Russia will try to prolong war of attrition till the spring of 2023, when Kremlin expects deep European energy economic crisis. It's obviously because of deficit of Russian gas and oil in European Union. In this case, Kremlin hopes that NATO and EU countries will stop support of Ukraine and press on Kiev to sign some peace agreement which will fix Russian current territorial achievement in Ukraine and give Moscow time to concentrate new military capabilities to continue war against Ukraine till the full destroying of Ukrainian state. And I could predict that more and more shift to hybrid warfare instead of conventional kinetic warfare, because a lot of sources told that, for example, Ukrainian reserve for artillery barrels now have a limitation. And I'm not sure that Russian industry, without Western technology, Western instruments, could produce very quality artillery barrels. And without it, it's impossible to continue this artillery firewall, so-called artillery firewall they created in Donbass in May and June, before Ukraine got HIMARS and suppressed the artillery. Second, Ukraine. Ukraine will concentrate more Western smart, powerful, long-range weapons with developing network-centric warfare capabilities to conduct deep fire impact to occupied territories, including Crimea, and we know that Ukraine started to do it. The main goal of this impact will be to shape battlefield, I mean destruction of Russian command and control system, as well as logistic lines, ammunition warehouses, air defense, aviation, electronic warfare capabilities, and military critical infrastructure. And Black Sea Fleet main base in Sevastopol will be the target as well, I'm sure. Total intensive and massive fire pressure in all of depth of Russian forces should create unsuitable conditions to continue military actions at Ukrainian territory and make them to withdraw to Russia. I would say it's very similar to what Ukrainian forces done in northern part of Ukraine during the February and March of this year, when the Ukrainian forces cut all of logistics, cut off all of the command and control lines, and they just push out Russian forces. Even in some areas, for example, in Chernihiv and Sumy region, they get invade to Ukrainian territory for several hundreds kilometers, but they didn't have any logistic support and, of course, any resources to continue to fight. So I will stop here, but again, I would say that about democracy and national resilience. I told, when I start my speech, I told that national resilience should include three components: citizens, civil society, and state. Because, for example, Belarus approach, it's a different one. They think that national resilience, it's only one man, strong man, like a Putin or Lukashenko. So I think that in this case, if you have only one man as a guarantor of national resilience, it's a very weak system. Compare Russian and Ukrainian resilience, I would say that Ukrainian and Romanian resilience much more stronger than any authoritarian regime and state. Thank you very much, and I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mykhailo. We will have a question and answer session. In principle, it's about 5 o'clock, so everybody will have the time to intervene. Just a very brief comment on what you said. You mentioned readiness to fight. This morning was mentioned, I think, by Mr. Larionov, the question of the will to fight on Mr. Putin's side. I think the question of the will is already civilizational in this part of Europe, and it's a question of values. So as you said, resilience is more than military readiness to fight. It involves the whole of society. This is one thing. The other thing is, you mentioned resilience. Also this morning was mentioned the fact that the Black Sea was topics raised I don't know how many times by countries referring to the Black Sea from the point of view of a necessary strategy for the Black Sea. The first gathering on resilience in the Black Sea, when you had your own project with Poland and Estonia, was made here by the New Strategy Center and the European Union after Ukraine, after 2014, Crimea. You see that this was unfortunately visionary in a negative side, but it was useful to have it. Thank you so much. So now, Madame TSEKHANOVSKA, you have the floor.
Hello. Thank you everyone for having me. Thank you for extending this kind invitation. And I was thinking a lot about what my colleague and friend Mykhailo said about the resilience of Ukrainian society as a whole, as a combination of several components that made us survive these past 6 months instead of what Putin desired to be a short, triumphant 3-day special military operation. It has been a very difficult 6 months for all the people of Ukraine, even if they are not based in Ukraine right now. We have been living to the sound of air raid alerts, and it might sound simple if you Google it or if you listen to it on YouTube, but if you wake up to it one morning, you will never be able to really react to this sound the way you could before. You will never be able to dismiss it like you will never be able to dismiss what we have survived since February 24th. We have witnessed the tragedy of Mariupol, a city that is now 95% ruined, a city where at the very least more than 80,000 people have been killed. We have seen Russian war crimes in Bucha, in Irpin, in Borodyanka, and these are the names of the places on the map that we have learned from the news, but how many other small towns and villages are there that have been razed to earth by the Russian invasion? It's a terrifying reality that we have been dealing with. Nevertheless, despite all these horrors, I would like to mention 2 numbers that I think are very inspiring. First of all, according to the social polls, 98% of Ukrainian citizens believe in victory. Moreover, for 84% of Ukrainians, no form of territorial concessions to Russia is considered possible, considered acceptable. And that includes the territories of the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk puppet republics installed by the Kremlin in 2014, and that includes Crimea. So these 2 numbers that are very inspiring to me, especially as a contrast to the horrors that we have seen, they show that Ukrainian society has a very deep belief and trust to the armed forces of Ukraine, to the Ukrainian government, which is a very surprising thing for us, actually. We are not traditionally a society that likes and trusts its own government, so we have made a discovery about ourselves in this war. It shows that the Ukrainian society has a capability to be resilient. If we talk about specific factors that influence this resilience, I will not talk a lot about military factors because Mykhailo is a much better expert in this field than I am. I will mostly focus on communications and countering disinformation because I'm an information security expert. And I have been professionally watching Russian television for hours every day for several years. So unfortunately, I'm deeply traumatized, but I have some expertise to discuss this issue. But if we talk about the combination of factors driving Ukrainian resilience, I would group them in three major categories. And the first category I would call experience and performance. Of course, here, first of all, it's the military factor that has been evolving since 2014. Ukraine has been slowly but surely, or maybe not so slowly, transitioning to the NATO standards. And of course, the creativity of Ukrainian asymmetrical military approach has been discussed at length as a contrast to the old, very centralized Soviet-style Russian military command. What is also important to mention here is the experience and performance of institutions. Now, one of the things that, negative, unfortunately, things that Ukraine is often associated with is corruption. And the idea that Ukraine is essentially a failed state. The idea of Ukraine as a failed state is one of the key narratives that the Russian propaganda has been pushing since 2014 at the very least, but actually in truth before that. And the war has shown us in the most challenging circumstances how far from the truth this narrative, this claim is. Because despite the large-scale invasion, Ukrainian state institutions have continued to work and to perform. And I would say they do so rather well. The emergency services have demonstrated wonders, and they have to deal daily with the challenges of daily shellings. For example, Kharkiv is the city that is shelled daily, on daily basis, for more than 6 months. Ukrainian railway has also demonstrated wonders of courage and effectiveness. They have, since February 24th, they have evacuated more than 4 million people. Under shellings, under attacks, some of the evacuation trains and railway stations have been targeted by Russian strikes. More than 1,000 employees of Ukrainian railways have been killed in the line of duty while they helped civilian people to evacuate. To a certain extent, the COVID-19 pandemic was what helped us to be better prepared for what we faced on February 24th. If there was one good thing to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic is that we learned and we have already been experienced in decentralizing processes, in making them in transferring them to the online environment, basically in working in non-stop critical situation. And that also added to institutional resilience in Ukraine. And of course, if we finish up with the first category of experience and performance is the civic society in Ukraine. And as a representative of the information security area, I'm mostly talking here about the counter-disinformation expert community in Ukraine that has been very active since 2014, that has formed trust-based communications both with the government and with Ukrainian citizens that also contributed to our success. And one of the things that actually made us stand up to this threat and made us endure is the fact that essentially we never really doubted the importance of what we're doing, because I am very much sure that my colleagues here with me today from Poland and Romania never shared the view that we in Ukraine would very often encounter when we talked to someone from the Western Europe, to someone from Berlin, for example, or to someone from Paris, when we would voice our concerns experts about the Russian influence, for example, in information area, and they would tell us that you exaggerate, you're basically being paranoid. This is something that we have been hearing since 2014, but unfortunately, we are right. It doesn't make us happy, but it means that we understand, and we have been understanding what we do for many years. And that concludes the first category, but we also have two more. And the second one, it doesn't mean that it's less important than the first one, is values, value-based approach to resilience. It is obvious, and I hope that it will be obvious to everyone for a very long time, forever, that Ukrainian and Russian societies are very different, and that never will we ever again hear a question like when we say we are from Ukraine, oh, it's somewhere in Russia, it's somewhere close to Russia. February 24th has ruined that forever. I really very much hope so. And our societies are based on different values. Now, I am not Russian, thank God, and I am not ready to talk about the values that exist and are primary in the Russian society. But I can say a thing or two about Ukrainian values. And for us, the most important thing is freedom. And this is something that stands at all odds with the nature of Russian political regime, how it treats its own people, how the people react to this treatment, and of course how the Kremlin and its supporters views Ukraine. Freedom has been always a crucially important value for Ukrainian society. And when on the February 24th Russian Federation attacked, they unknowingly, because they have always dismissed us and they believe we did not have agency of our own, so we shouldn't be studied properly, they made a big mistake because they attacked the key value that unites the Ukrainian people with all our differences of opinion, with whether we speak Ukrainian language or Russian language. Now you can see that 98% of Ukrainian people believe in victory over Russian population, and 95% of Ukrainians have an extremely negative attitude towards the Russian Federation. So there you have the value-based factor of resilience. And the third category is let's call it the horizontal cooperation, the horizontal, decentralized approach practiced in civil society, first and foremost. Because our community in Ukraine has formed throughout these years trust-based communications in different regions, and Ukraine is a big country with a lot of regional differences, so we diversified. We tried our best to not just stay focused solely on Kiev. We made partnerships. We found people we could trust in different cities, in West, in the East, in the North, and in the South. These communications were trust-based, and they were mostly driven by the civic society, not by the government, but slowly but surely we learned to include the government, at least certain parts of it. And specifically, I'm talking about the Center for Countering Disinformation and Information Security at the Ministry of Culture, which is the institution first and foremost tasked with information security in Ukraine. This institution was launched and formed and organized by a person from civic society community, by a person who was, as I am now, an employee of Ukraine Crisis Media Center, one of the leading NGOs in Ukraine. And she worked, her name is Lyubov Tsibulska, I think that maybe some of you in the audience know her. She worked very hard from the very beginning to fight this gap of trust that civic society usually has towards the government, and she prevailed. And so in these most challenging circumstances on February 24th, we already knew that, at least in the part of our government, we have a friend who understands us very well. This circle of communication between government and leading Ukrainian NGOs also allowed for targeted partnerships. We were able to afford to diversify. For example, there are NGOs that have proficiency in debunking, such as Stop Fake, and government has some rather successful projects together with them. But if, for example, you need someone who is better with exploring big data and producing research based on that, then we have other civic society organizations who are focused specifically on that field, and so on and so forth. And targeted partnerships made us very efficient. And also because, again, it is very important that these communications are trust-based, because we have this trust, because we have this safe space to talk to each other, to argue sometimes, but to arrive to the common conclusions. We use this space between us as representatives of civic organizations and the government to have a messaging lab of sorts. We would consult with each other and we would devise an approach that we think is best for one target group or another target group. And of course, there are some other things I would very much like to say about how we can apply these lessons to other countries, maybe some other societies, but I'm afraid my time's up, so I will be very happy to answer your questions afterwards.
Thank you very much for covering the other side of the move on resilience in Ukraine. I will make again reference to this morning's debates, this time from the general to particular, the relation between multilateralism, normative dissolution of normative character, and the question of values. And you have started from the other side. Mr. CHIFU, I think it's your turn to take the floor, to see from Romania and Poland now our vision. As I said, there's still half an hour. Let's see how we manage it, because you have, I think, interesting things to say, and hopefully also questions and answers. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your invitation. I'm very happy to come here among the usual friends. First, I will begin with the disclaimer that I'm obliged to make, that the things that I'm talking about are not necessarily representing the position of the Romanian government. As you know, I'm coming from think tanker, and I'm going to use more extensively my experience in that area for presenting you some of the issues at stake. And I will begin also with getting somehow to the basics, meaning to the theory. The Henry Jackson Society has made since 1944 an assessment on the geopolitical capabilities of countries. The last one, somewhere in 2019, has underlined a number of indicators to show you at what respect and what stands in the basis of that formed capacity, geopolitical capacity. Relying to some first 20 states, the G20, excluding EU, including Nigeria, that was the base. Rand Corporation with Mazar has made twice, last time I think some week ago, I saw the last result of their study related to the study of competitiveness of the nations. Once again, they discover, or they succeed in putting down by taking all the bases of the history in different fights, what would be the mechanisms and the instruments that shows you if one side or the other is winning, where victory stands, what are the bases. And this very large study, which begins somewhere in Thucydides in the Peloponnesian Wars, so on and so forth, actually try to realize that it's not about always about, and not only about the number of weapons, the number of tanks, the number of, you name it, It has also some imponderables that are defined. Actually, they've reached 7 of them, and that showed us what and where lies the real difference and where it goes. For sure, we all know, and there's a lot of literature related to how to compare nations. It's also a basis to look at for finding the basis and the internal resorts inside societies that are leading to victory in a fight. I'm not going to make the full, theory about a good war, a bad war, what is the essence, what is the polarization, how that should defend, but with that altogether we are arriving at a very fashionable concept of resilience, still debatable, still linked on one side with security, with threats, vulnerabilities and risks. On another hand, discussing capacities of decision-making in crisis, how to react in crisis. The third layer, or the third generation, if you want, looks at prospective studies, future crisis, where it comes from. How can we prepare for the crisis that the societies are going to face, not the one that they've already faced, so the so-called new crisis. And on in all, discussing also these imponderable of the internal structures of societies and communities that lead to vitality, to adaptation, and capacity to react. Sure, there's a full spectrum of debate about identity, cohesion, so societal security. Fukuyama has developed a book in 2019. He was aiming at explaining how populism has risen as a side effect of democracy and tricking side effect of democracy, discussing about the need for respect, dignity, recognition, integrating all the members of the society, citizens, minorities. And here we have a first hint. The big story, the big narrative of Russia was that it wants to defend the Russians. Okay, Russian speakers and compatriots, if you want to take it the full sentence, but the Russians. What we have seen in the war, Kharkiv, supposedly to be taken in 12 to 18 hours, 90% Russian majority town, is fighting even today against the Russian army. In the south, in Kherson and in the Zaporozhye regions, towns with majority of Russians exiting in the streets with Ukrainian flags and telling the Russian army to go home. How this narrative can stay? If you have a bad narrative, even if you are designing it for your own people first and foremost, it could not stand as much as when you go on the streets, when you look at the realities, you see that it didn't hold. For sure, we can discuss about the moral. Will to fight, or maybe will to defend when you have something to defend. It's also linked to the index and to the characters that I underlined previously in the studies that stands on the basis of comparing competitiveness and geopolitical capabilities of nations. Actually, another big mistake was the fact of ignoring the fact that Ukraine is a nation. One thing is to make propaganda and to say, okay, Ukrainians, we are our brothers, is the same type of Slavic basis, Russian coming from Rus, it's all of us all together. And it's another thing not to observe differences and the forge of a nation and of identity. 1991, statehood. Democracy. You don't have 2 mandates and by 1 president in Ukraine. Actually, the electoral democracy was there. Orange Revolution showed you civil society in the forefront, capacity of the society to challenge any type of succession or inheritage, if you want, for the presidency and for the power. We have the only case where people died on the street for defending European values. Remember when we said, well, it's very difficult to have a European nation because no European army, because nobody will die for Europe, for the stars. Well, 101 Ukrainians died under the tears of the Titushki in 2014, the Maidan, Euromaidan, defending European values and their choice to go for Europe. That's also very important, and they didn't observe even if they abducted and annexed Crimea. Moreover, we have now a very full-fledged nation, and the examples that I underline about the reaction of the Russians in Ukraine, who prefer to be Ukrainian citizens than to stay under Putin's Russia, is very eloquent. For sure, we cannot rule out the fact that the whole attack on Ukraine was based on a number of mistakes. Mistakes coming from misleading information, from lies, from the fear or hiding the truth from a totalitarian leader. If you have questions, remember the recorded session of the Security Council where Naryshkin was actually desperately looking in the eyes of Putin, asking him, boss, what would you like me to say? And I will say it. Actually, that comes with totalitarian rules, and we Romanians, we do have a history. We had a guy called Ceausescu, you know how it ended. He also arrived at the moment where he was completely in distress, because when he knew that the people is loving him, is adoring him, and he saw that everybody is against him, that he's isolated and everybody wants to take his head. So that's another point which led to the existing situation. But it's also about training, tactics, troops. It's also about the fact that we begin, I remember Mykhailo and some of the guys here, we begin twice the security sector reform and the reform of the Ukrainian Army. I was in several moments there, and actually the guys the Ukrainian guys were telling us completely what we should tell them. We said, well, but you know everything. What do you need us? We need you to come to tell that, because nobody is believing us. We begin twice, but at the end of the day, it proved that those security sector reforms and reforms of the army have proven to be successful. At least comparing to, and that's another point into our equation, to the corruption that is defining the Russian Army. To the fact that it has some pockets of special operation, niche forces, highly trained, good equipment, and a big mass of, I will put it, the Soviet-type army, but in a war situation, because they didn't make it even a Soviet army, neither preparedness, neither equipment, even in the development of the weaponry. It has been shown that, yes, there are some achievements, a number, and we can count them, of weapons of one type or another, well developed, but the biggest part of the army has never seen those weapons. They never shot. They were not trained into this. They are completely expensive, costly, and never integrated actually in the tactics and in the exercises, except for the show when you have big level visitors. This is not the real army, and this is not the real thing, and that's another point which counts. It was an army made for Cold War, maybe for a post-Cold War, even worse in terms of preparedness, because weapons were aging. Discussing T-50, T-62, and putting them in the first line, okay, that's ridiculous. The capacity of, it doesn't count if they have thousands of tanks. You've seen how they blow up very quickly to each of the Stingers or of the that you are using. So it's a matter of matching the purposes, the objectives. It's not a matter of showing up and everybody running away. And now about the Ukrainian army. We've seen precision and effectiveness because you don't have enough weapons to use. We've seen intel and ISR extensively used. We've seen flexible chains of command, if not inventive and entrepreneurship type of leadership, local leadership, low-level leadership units, leadership that take the advantage and the adaptation in the forefront and are using their personal skills and the knowledge of the group that they are leading in order to adapt to the situation. We also saw the fact that I will call this the Serpent's Island syndrome, meaning untenable occupation. Actually, at some point, Ukraine never won the Serpent's Island. Actually, it's very difficult to win and to keep it. But the fact is that it showed after Moscow and after some attacks to the supply lines, the fact that this Serpent's Island is untenable by the enemy. Russian cannot use it. The same type of situation is now happening on the west bank of the Dnipro River, actually in the northern part, in Kherson. As long as you blow up all the lines of supplies, bridges, and so on, and even dividing actually into two this, you cannot maintain the Russian troops there. They are going to leave at some point. At a larger scale and at a larger piece of time, the same type of strategy could be used for Crimea. Another very important point is the fact that Russians begin to feel that the war is coming home. It comes home on energy and economic directions, and little by little it's going to be felt. It comes in coffins. It comes also with how it is called, you know, the Russian soldiers are smoking quite everywhere, and it blows up quite in every piece of the land, including in Russia per se, in Belgorod, in some other regions. It's also a very important psychological added value. But what we have to say, and that's my conclusion, we are facing a long war of attrition. Some would put 3 to 5 years, but let's look at Syria, it's already 11 plus years. It's not going to be easy. It's a matter of a long war, and it's very difficult to say who won the war because we don't have still definitions of victory for neither of the sides to see where we are going. There's a full incompatibility of position between the two parties, so we are closer to a type of Korean post-war than any type of agreement of, I don't know, freezing or anything of that kind. So the war is not over. It's good to take the lessons learned. We are paying very much attention, and I think that that's another good thing, to look also on the other side, to look at the pieces of resilience that Russia has proved in the military, inside, internally, in the economy, in the adaptation. It's true that it's very difficult, and that's another very hard point, it's very difficult to make a centralized, politicized war when you have a leader who says you should do that in 15 days, or you should take it in 3 days, or I want to receive the parade of the winners on the Hreșcătic in 4 days, as it was the first order. This is completely against planning, against military art, against all the odds and all the figures. And that being said, it's good to be here and to applaud, and thank you for all the Ukrainians who are still there defending actually our values. We are supporting them in any case, with everything that we have in hand. But we have also to see that it is not a stroke, it is not a cross, it is a marathon. And we need to be prepared for the long run, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I share your conclusion, the long run. I want to make a very brief point. Nobody has spoken so far, I think, on the doctrine of the correlation of forces, which is a test for the structure of power in Russia. And I think in the long run, this will be proven, because this has been as the basis of the Soviet strategy and then the Russian strategy in the last decade. So now, we are going to Adam Eberhard. I want to point out that he's also representative of the Prime Minister for the Republic of Moldova. This is important because the title is significant. It indicates reform. This is related to the fact that both Ukraine and Moldova, our republic, are candidates to the European Union. I think this is something which has to be mentioned. And another thing, if you have time, look at the bibliography of Adam Eberhard, and you will be impressed. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you very much for having me here. It is my great pleasure to join the meeting here in Bucharest. Well, not much time, so maybe I will just briefly focus on what was already said by the speakers. I agree with both Mykhailo and Iulian that we are facing war of attrition. It is a long war, and it will be a long war, because Russia aims not only on conquering territories, but destroying Ukrainian statehood and even more, Ukrainian nation as such. And as a result, there is no space for any compromise. There is no compromise between predator and its prey and its victim. The problem with the war is that we are not able to accommodate Mr. Putin. We are not able to seek any compromise because also of political culture in Russia, and willingness to seek a compromise is perceived by the Kremlin as a sign of weakness. And it does not necessarily lead to reciprocation, but it leads to additional demands. So it is one point which should be taken into consideration, especially by Western leaders, who might be more and more willing to strike a deal to seek a compromise. In my opinion, such a deal, such a truce, a ceasefire, would be the worst case scenario for Ukraine and for the free world, because it would allow Russia to digest occupied territories, it would allow Russia to regroup, to get prepared, and to attack again. While in case of Ukraine, the situation would look completely different. It would, today Ukrainians are fighting the war of independence, and their morale is very high, according to what was said by Oleksandra, but it should not be taken for granted. If we see any kind of ceasefire, Ukrainian political class would split, and Ukrainian society would split for hawkish and dovish people, for those who want peace, for those who are opposing it. And as a result, you know, as long as Ukrainians are fighting the war, there is some kind of adrenaline. If there is a ceasefire, then it would lead to demobilization of the people who would feel the consequences of the war. So, and it leads me to the first lesson, which should be taken into account by the Western community. First, we should do no harm. We should not press Ukrainian government to seek any compromise. I fully agree, well, maybe not fully, but I agree with what was said by Mykhailo, that the only solution is military defeat of Russia. But I'm afraid, Mykhailo, it is not enough. A military defeat of Russia is not enough to secure Ukraine. Let me remind you of the situation of 90s, where Russian troops were defeated in Chechnya back in 1996. Russia regrouped, prepared, and 3 years later, Russian tanks attacked Chechnya once again. So what we need is not only military defeat of Russia, but we need also an internal collapse and regime change in Russia. I don't know how likely it is to happen, and probably more likely than anyone believes, because any autocratic, any totalitarian system does not allow the stem, yes, the steam to get out of the society, and people get frustrated, and one day it may lead to some drastic situation in Russia. What the Western community should do is certainly to increase political price for Russia by imposing additional sanctions, even if in short term the sanctions do not work as we would like them to work, even if they are consolidating Russian people around the government, around Putin for time being. But it will change. One day it will change, because what we need to secure, what we need to do is to convince Russians that it is also their war, and that they are to pay a political and economic price for the war waged by Putin. When it comes to a regional context, well, I come from Poland. I'm proud of Polish tanks which were passed to Ukrainian friends, which help Ukraine to defend against Russian aggression. And certainly military equipment, military aid should be transferred to Ukraine. It was already discussed during this conference. But we should also think about some regional context. I think that Poland and Romania, because of our geographical location, because of our size, we should be somehow leading countries in creating a coalition of countries who support Ukraine, not only in words, but also in deeds. And it should be certainly about deliveries. It should be about supporting a infrastructure, because it is not only deliveries of arms supplies, it is also export of grain, for instance, via Romanian and Polish ports. But it is also a humanitarian factor, but it is also supporting European perspective of Ukraine, and it is working out some solutions in the regional context. Ukraine should be admitted to 3Cs initiative with concrete efforts to improve our infrastructure, trans-border infrastructure between Romania and Ukraine and between Poland and Ukraine. It is something we have been neglecting over the last 30 years, and now we are paying a price for not having good road or railway connections between our countries, and it is something we should consider to improve. Well, just one of the examples what could be a flagman project of Polish-Romanian Ukrainian cooperation is Ukrainian willingness to change to standard gauge railroad in Ukraine. What I believe would be beneficial is to think about having a direct connection with a normal gauge rail between Poland to Lviv, to Ivano-Frankivsk, to Czernice, and then south to Romania, to Constanța and Bucharest. It would allow us to bypass Carpathian Mountains, and it would have extremely important military, economic, and social benefits. It could be part of a 3Cs initiative. It should also be linked to Rail to Sea program that is being implemented by Poland, Romania, and other 3C initiative countries. And I think what we should do today is certainly to support Ukraine, to fight war against Russia, but we should prepare, as we understand that it will be a long war, we should also focus on very concrete programs that would improve our regional contacts, our regional ties, what would be beneficial not only for time of war, but also for time of peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adam. You have again confirmed your capacity to navigate simultaneously between the conceptual and the concrete, and as always, grateful to you to end on the concrete note. Now, I will have a Solomonic dilemma. We have, according to the book, 2 more minutes for questions and answers. I will appeal to you for 5 minutes, let's say 5 post 5 for 2 questions, but no more, because otherwise we will get into trouble with the next panel and with Gheorghe Sputaru. Where is he? 2 questions, quick, and I will take them together. Bogdan, Mr. Bernaghe from...
What's your view on a ban for tourist visas for Russian citizens?
Well, if I may? Well, I'm in favor of not issuing tourist visa for Russian citizens, because I believe that what we need to do, as I said, is to increase political price. Putin is safe as long as Russian society believes that it is not their war. It is their war, and they should pay the price for it. It is the only option, in my opinion.
Yeah, if I may, absolutely support this decision, because, you know, when we're talking about it, okay, Putin responsible for this war, okay, who is killing Ukrainians there on the battlefield? If we're counting how many Russians connected to concrete military operations in Ukraine, it will be millions of families, of colleagues, of industry. So when actually the majority of Russian people is responsible directly, and of course another part is indirectly, but I'm sure that if Russians want to travel through Europe and have some pleasure to get some European values, atmospheric, great time, they need to change the regime. That's all. And go ahead. It's very simple.
Okay, one more to go, or I close. Finish. Please. You won't get into the time of your own panel.
No. The question is dramatic but simple on the other hand. We have been discussing all over the day the situation when the victory of Ukraine is the long-term solution for the problem. What about the opposite, what we will do if this is not the case?
Mr. Godzimski, if you got it clear, I didn't get it very clear, but if you got it, you answered.
The opposite, yeah. What if Ukraine? Yeah, if Ukraine, yes, it's loses, yeah. It's, I don't know, actually, because if we got the 24th of February, it was kind of black and white. Can you imagine, when I saw from the Putin speech before the order, he told that denazification, for me it was kind of, you know, it's a black and white. We exist or we don't exist. So it's, of course it's emotional, but in practical way, I think that it's rather impossible for Russians. Because the 24th of February was a key day that the catastrophic decisions on the bad intelligence appeared, and now they stay on the decision how to prolong this war, how to impact on the European Union, how to change the cohesion between Ukraine and allies. But from a military point of view, I am sure that Russia cannot propose us something new. Maybe nuclear weapon, but I think it's absolutely crazy and out of this discussion. Of course it's possible because Putin can use whatever he wants, but by the way, I think that the elites around, even in FSB guys around Putin, I hope that they won't allow him to launch the nuclear. Thank you.
Okay, I will take it as well. First, it's very difficult. Once again, we don't have a definition of what victory means for either part. What means that Ukraine wins? What means that Russia wins? Second point, sure, I believe that that's a fact of life. Russia will lose. Why? Because the whole rest of the democratic world has embraced this objective. And I'm not going to quote back neither Chancellor Scholz, neither President Biden, but that's the objective. Russia should lose. Once again, depends what lose and win. And the third part of the answer is the fact that for sure everybody is planning for all the alternatives. And in that direction you have a plethora of debates. Who's next? Kazakhstan has positioned itself in a certain kind of realignment. Armenia is also trying to find alternatives into that direction. Belarus, depending what Belarus means, Lukashenko or the opposition are also looking to see alternative way outs in one way or another, and if they are going to be completely swallowed or part of Russia, or how they are going to resist. So in that direction, I don't think, and that's my conclusion, I don't think that the occupation of Ukraine, or of a great share of Ukraine, including the borders, the northern part of the Black Sea till our borders, till the Danube, will mean loss for Ukraine. We've seen already special operations forces, we've seen the resistance behind the scenes, and we have at least 2 or 3 places where we saw very important, Berdyansk is one of them, but I can quote some others as well, where this resistance makes things count. So what I can say for sure, Ukraine will win, and Russia will not win, even though it is occupying a bigger share of the territory, trying to swallow it, because they don't know. It's very complicated to administrate, to manage a territory of people who are completely against you, uncooperative. It's very difficult, even if you make those camps of filtration and you are deporting them to Siberia or to some other regions. Lessons learned from the Soviet Union.
Well, the question of Jakub, what happens if Ukraine does not win the war, yes? Well, it means Ukraine will pay a huge price, because we can see the nature of Russian occupation, but paradoxically it would also speed up the process of internal collapse of Russia, because Russia is not able to digest Ukraine.
Thank you very much. I think it is time to give an ovation to our speakers in this panel. And successful resilience.